Can you pretend to be my son's father? Red Creek Church. Early spring morning during the baptism ceremony, the hush of sacred ritual settled over Red Creek Church as the baptism ceremony began. Wooden pews groaned beneath the weight of polished boots and Sunday dresses. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, casting ribbons of crimson and gold across the aisle. Mothers cradled their infants, swaddled in white, while fathers stood close, hands resting protectively on small shoulders. The final notes of the hymn faded, leaving behind a reverent stillness, one filled with the breathless anticipation of new blessings and the soft murmur of holy water soon to fall. The widow asked, and the lonely lumberjack said, yes, Red Creek Church, early spring morning. The wooden pews of Red Creek Church creaked beneath layers of polished boots and rustling skirts. Sunlight streamed through colored panes, painting the floor in red and gold. Infants wrapped in white lay in their mothers' arms. Fathers stood proudly beside their wives. The hymn ended. Silence followed, heavy and expectant. Juniper Hale sat alone. She smoothed the folds of her faded blue dress, stitched and restitched at the hem, and cradled her son, Nathan, in her arms. He was just 1 year old, cheeks round and warm against her collarbone. His small hands clutched the edge of the shawl she had knitted during too many sleepless nights. Today was supposed to be his day, his welcome into the faith, his name spoken before God. As the pastor moved down the aisle, stopping at each family, Juniper took a breath. When he reached her, he knelt slightly and spoke low. I am sorry, Miss Hale, but church tradition calls for the father to be present, or at least a godfather. We cannot make an exception without a male representative. Juniper blinked once, then again. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The pastor gave her a regretful look, touching the Bible at his chest. I hope you understand. She nodded barely, then sat back down, gripping Nathan tighter. He stirred, letting out a soft whimper. She rocked him slowly, willing herself not to cry, around her. The whispers began. She's back again, alone, of course. Poor child, born without a name. Maybe she should have thought twice before chasing her husband into a grave. Juniper's breath caught. Her skin burned as if their words had been lit with fire. Nathan whimpered again. She looked up at the altar, at the wooden cross shining in the colored light. The stained glass Jesus stared down with open arms. She wondered if he saw her, if he even cared. Nathan's small fingers tugged gently at her dress. You did nothing wrong, she whispered to him, voice trembling. You deserve to be welcomed just like the others, but there was no one to stand beside them. She looked around the church, then she saw him, at the back of the sanctuary, leaning against the far wall beneath the shadow of rafters stood Callum Vance, tall, silent, rough, edged like the forest he called home. His coat bore streaks of sap. His boots were caked in dust. His eyes, deep, unreadable, watched the crowd with a gaze that dared anyone to look back. Juniper had never spoken to him. The townsfolk called him a ghost in the woods, said he lost his wife and son to the sickness 3 winters ago, and stopped believing in God the day he buried them. She stood, her feet moved before her thoughts did. Her heart thundered in her ears as she stepped into the aisle, clutching Nathan. Every eye turned, murmured. Rose, she did not stop. When she reached him, she looked up. He turned his head slow as the morning fog. Excuse me, Juniper said, barely above a whisper. Can you pretend to be my son's father just for today, or the preacher won't baptize him? The silence between them stretched taut. Callum looked down at Nathan. The baby blinked up at him, thumb and mouth. Callum said nothing, not at first. Then he gave the smallest nod, firm, sure. Juniper let out the breath she had been holding for what felt like hours. They walked together down the aisle. The church fell deathly still. Callum stepped beside her at the altar. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. She did not dare look at him. The pastor blinked in surprise, but he said nothing. He turned a page in his book, cleared his throat. Do you take this child to be yours in the eyes of God? Callum's voice was low, rough like bark, certain. "I do." The hush that followed was louder than thunder. Juniper closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. For the first time in a long time, she did not feel alone. Late morning after the baptism, Juniper kept her eyes low as the final hymn faded and folks began to rise from their pews. She busied herself folding the white baptism cloth, tucking it around Nathan with careful hands. The baby had fallen asleep again, warm against her chest, his tiny breath calm and steady. She dared not linger. She stood, adjusting her shawl, ready to slip out before the eyes and whispers returned. But before she could take a step, a shadow fell across her. Callum was already there. Without a word, he gently reached out and took Nathan from her arms, cradling the child against his chest. It was not abrupt or forceful. It was natural, familiar even. "Your wagon's too small for two," he said, voice low and rough. "I'll take you both. I know the trail better." Juniper opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. He turned without waiting, walking ahead of her with long strides. She followed, feet moving almost on instinct. Callum's wagon stood under the willow behind the church, a simple wooden cart, sturdy and worn. Dust clung to the wheels. A blanket faded from years of use lay spread. Across the bench, he laid Nathan down with care, adjusting the folds of the blanket to shield the child from the breeze. Then he turned, offering his hand. Juniper hesitated for half a breath before taking it. His palm was calloused, fingers strong, but his grip was gentle. He helped her up and didn't let go until she was seated. Then he climbed up beside her, flicked the reins, and the wagon rolled forward, creaking in rhythm with the road. They rode in silence through the edge of Red Creek, past blooming lilacs and wooden fences weathered by wind. Soon the trees gathered close, and the dirt path narrowed into the forest trail that led toward the hills. The only sounds were the hooves on soil, the low groan of wood, and Nathan's quiet breathing. Juniper kept her eyes forward, but her thoughts churned. She glanced at Callum. Earlier, when the water had touched Nathan's forehead, she had seen it. The stiffness in Callum's shoulders, the tremor in his hand as it rested on her son. He had looked away from the altar, then jaw clenched, eyes burning with something deeper than memory. She hesitated now, the words forming before she could stop them. "You used to believe, didn't you?" He didn't answer right away. The wagon creaked along the trail, shadows from the trees above dancing across his face. When he finally spoke, it was quiet, ragged. "Belief never saved anyone I loved." His words sat heavy between them. Juniper didn't respond. Instead, she looked down at Nathan, still nestled in his borrowed blanket, then turned her gaze to the trees, stretching tall around them, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. The trail jolted suddenly, an uneven patch of earth. The wagon rocked. Nathan stirred. A small sound escaped him, a whimper. He blinked, still half in sleep, his hands flailing softly in the air, reaching. Before Juniper could move, Callum had already extended one hand, slow, steady. Nathan's tiny fingers found his, wrapped around his weathered index finger held tight. Juniper froze. Her son, a child who had never willingly touched a stranger, who cried even at the voice of someone unfamiliar, was holding on. No hesitation, no fear. Callum looked down at the small hand gripping his. He did not pull away. He merely lowered his head slightly, shielding his face from view. But Juniper caught the way his throat tightened, the way his eyes turned glassy in the soft, flickering shade of the trees. She said nothing because something had just shifted, not with words, not with promises, but with the quiet clasp of a child's hand. And in that moment, as the wagon rolled on beneath the wide Wyoming sky, something small, fragile, and deeply human began to take root. Something that no one, not even Callum Vance, had expected to feel. Again, Juniper pushed open the creaking gate as the wagon pulled up near the edge of the hill. Her cabin stood quietly where the pine trees parted, humble, single-story, its roof patched in places with tin and old wood. A narrow porch stretched across the front, two mismatched chairs sitting beneath a winch. I'm made from old silverware. I can make you some tea, she offered, her voice still soft, unsure. Callum glanced at her, then at the baby sleeping in his arms. He gave a small nod. She unlocked the door and stepped inside first. The room was small but warm. Sunlight spilled through linen curtains. A rocking chair rested by the hearth. The scent of dried herbs and old pine lingered in the air. Everything was simple, lived in, clean in the way that took effort. Behind her, Callum paused at the threshold. His broad frame nearly filled the doorway. He didn't move for a long moment, just stood there, eyes scanning the space as if trying to decide whether he belonged inside. Juniper turned slightly, noticed his hesitation. "You can come in," she said quietly. He ducked his head and stepped through. His boots thudded gently on the floorboards as he walked inside. He remained standing as Juniper moved to the stove, lighting the flame with practiced hands. The kettle hissed softly as she filled it, her fingers trembling just slightly. Too much had happened in too little time. Nathan stirred. She turned carefully, unwrapping the blanket around him. But before she could take him, Callum shifted the baby in his arms. "I've got him," he said. She froze. He wasn't holding the child in the awkward, distant way men sometimes did when they were afraid of breaking something small. No, he held Nathan with practiced strength and an unnatural gentleness. One hand cradling the back of the boy's head, the other tucked beneath him with steady support. Nathan yawned, then reached up with a tiny hand, gripping the edge of Callum's coat. His fingers clung to the worn fabric like it was familiar. Juniper didn't breathe. The baby didn't cry. Instead, his eyes fluttered, closed again, and he nestled his cheek against Callum's chest. Juniper watched them both, silhouetted in the soft light pouring through the window, and her heart etched in a place she thought had long since gone numb. Her husband had died before Nathan was born. He had never held their son, never rocked him to sleep, never whispered a name to his tiny ears. But here was a stranger doing it quietly, fully, as if it came from somewhere deep in his bones. Callum moved slowly to the small cradle in the corner of the room. As he leaned to place Nathan down, something on the floor beside the cradle caught his eye. A small wooden horse, unfinished, broken down the middle, one leg split. The seat uneven. Callum paused. Juniper stepped closer, following his gaze. "He never finished it," she said quietly. "My husband, he started it right after I told him I was pregnant. Got sick not long after. That's as far as he got." Callum crouched slowly. His fingers brushed the cracked surface, traced the edge of the split. His jaw clenched slightly, not in frustration. In reverence, he picked the toy up carefully, turning it over once in his hands. The room was quiet, save for the bubbling of the kettle and the soft breath of a sleeping child. Would it be all right? Callum said, his voice low, almost unsure. "If I tried to fix it." Juniper didn't speak right away. She looked at him, really looked at the roughness in his hands, the sorrow behind his stillness, the patience in the way he held something broken. She nodded, then turned back to the stove before the tears could rise. The days that followed. Callum returned 3 days later. He didn't knock, just stood at the edge of the porch, holding something wrapped in burlap. Juniper opened the door with Nathan on her hip. Her eyes widened as she saw what he carried, the wooden rocking horse. Repaired, smoothed, sturdy. He had recarved the legs, sanded down the splinters, even stained it with a honey-cold oil. The seat was reinforced, the rockers curved just enough for gentle sway. Juniper covered her mouth. Callum didn't say a word. He carried it inside and placed it carefully near the hearth. Nathan blinked at it for a moment, then squealed with delight. The little boy toddled forward, placed both chubby hands on the horse's side, and laughed as it moved under his weight. Callum stood quietly nearby, watching, a ghost made real. From that day on, he returned often. At first, it was to fix the creaking porch rail, then the broken pump, then the overgrown garden. He never stayed too long, never explained, but every time Nathan would crawl toward him, gurgling with glee, Callum would squat down, let the boy climb into his lap and sit there while hammering or whittling or simply staring into the woods beyond the fence. The village noticed. She's found herself a new man already. I thought he swore off everything after the fever took his family. That child looks more like Callum than his real father. Juniper heard them. Every time she walked into the bakery or past the dry goods store, she didn't flinch anymore. Not because it didn't hurt, but because Callum never once looked away when the whispers came, never denied it, never confirmed it. Just tipped his hat and kept walking beside her. One afternoon, while Nathan napped on a blanket in the sun, Juniper stepped onto the porch to find Callum carving something beneath the willow tree. "What are you making now?" she asked, her voice lighter than usual. He held it up. A tiny wooden wagon, intricately detailed, small wheels that actually turned. The side was carved with a name in blocky letters, Nathan. Juniper stared, hand tightening around the porch post. Her heart twisted. Callum glanced up. Figured he might want to pull it around once. "He's strong enough." A moment passed. "You do not have to keep doing these things," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I want to." Later that week, as Callum let Nathan crawl across his legs while planing, "A beam," he said softly. "As long as he wants me here, I will be." Juniper was washing dishes by the window when she heard him say it. She didn't speak, but her hands stilled in the basin. That evening, while sweeping the front step, Juniper asked without turning, "They say you're pretending to be something you're not." Callum didn't answer right away. Then, quiet and calm, "Maybe they're wrong, maybe I just haven't figured it out yet." It was the second Sunday evening when the storm clouds gathered. Nathan had been fussy all day. His cheeks flushed. Juniper touched his forehead and felt the heat thick and fast like wildfire. By nightfall, his skin burned and his little body trembled. She boiled water, crushed herbs, but her hands shook. The remedies weren't enough. Callum, she called, panicked. He was already there. Within minutes, he wrapped Nathan in a thick blanket, lifted him onto his back, and crouched down. "Well, go to the midwife's now," he said, "but it's through the woods at night." Juniper started. "I'll carry him, you follow." She didn't argue. The forest was a maze of shadows, the wind cold and sharp. Callum moved fast despite the weight. Juniper struggled to keep up, clutching her shawl tight. They arrived breathless. The midwife took the baby inside, began treating the fever with soaked linens and bitter roots. Juniper and Callum sat side by side by the cradle, silent, unmoving. Juniper's hands trembled in her lap. Hours passed, then a sound. Nathan's eyes blinked open. His lips moved. He reached toward Callum, babbling something soft and clumsy. "Da," the syllable hung in the air like lightning before thunder. Juniper gasped, a hand covering her mouth. Callum didn't speak. He leaned forward, placed his calloused palm gently over Juniper's hand. He didn't say it aloud, but in that moment something passed between them, stronger than words. Something claimed, something true. Callum spent 3 days rebuilding the door. He didn't say much, just arrived with fresh lumber and tools slung over his shoulder. The old hinges groaned one last time before he pulled them out. The wood, warped from years of rain and heat, came away like tired bones. He measured, cut, sanded, and fitted each new slat with quiet precision. Juniper watched from the porch with Nathan in her lap, a blanket tucked around them both. Steam curled from the mug in her hands, the scent of chamomile faint under the sharper tang of sawdust. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "Why do you keep fixing things that aren't yours?" Callum didn't pause. He kept shaving the edge of the frame with a plane, his voice low. "Maybe I want them to be." Juniper looked down at Nathan, who had taken to mimicking Callum's motions, slapping his small hand against the porch rail in rhythm with the rasp of the blade. "Look, Mama," she whispered. "He's learning." Later, as Callum hung the new door and tested its swing, Nathan reached out with both hands and gave a firm knock. "Boom," he said with delight. Callum tapped back with one knuckle, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "That's how you do it, partner." Juniper couldn't help it. She laughed. The sound surprised them both. Inside, when the door finally shut without a creak, she handed Callum a small bundle wrapped in muslin. He opened it to find a square of linen stitched by hand, 3 words embroidered in soft blue thread, "Come back safe." He stared at it for a long time, the rough pads of his thumbs brushing over the delicate loops of thread. Then he folded it once, just once, and slid it into the inside pocket of his coat. "I've never had something worth carrying before," he said. The days grew warmer. Callum began feeding the chickens without being asked, repaired a cracked step on the back stoop, carried in water when Juniper's back itched from bending too long. He still never lingered past sundown, but something had changed. A softness, perhaps, a rhythm that belonged to more than one pair of hands. One afternoon, while Callum watered the horses, a shadow fell across him. He turned to see a man standing at the edge of the corral. Broad-shouldered, stern, faced with the same dark hair as Juniper, Samuel Hale, the man said, her brother. Callum nodded once. "I figured." Samuel stepped closer, jaw tight. "What game are you playing, Vance? She's a widow. You're not her husband. You can't just slide in." Callum didn't raise his voice, didn't square his shoulders or clench his fists. He simply looked toward the cabin where Juniper stood in the doorway with Nathan balanced on one hip. "Maybe," Callum said, "you should ask her what she wants." Samuel followed his gaze, said nothing, just walked away. That night, Callum stood on the porch, ready to leave. He always left before nightfall. That had been the silent rule between them. Juniper had just laid Nathan down, the boy's soft breath still echoing in her chest. She stepped outside and leaned against the door frame. "The door doesn't creak anymore," she said quietly. Callum gave a small smile, hand resting on the latch. "But," she added, voice breaking like brittle bark, "I still wait for the sound." He stilled, then turned. "You want me to stay?" She nodded, the porch lantern casting tiny stars in her tear-filled eyes. Callum looked at her, then at the door, his door now too, whether he admitted it or not. He stepped inside and didn't leave when the sun went down. The town was too small for silence to last. At first, it was just murmurs outside the general store, then sideways glances at church. A few bolder women stopped Juniper in the street, their voices wrapped in false sweetness. "He's helping you so much, dear. One might think there's more to it." But it was the school teacher, Miss Alcott, gray bun tight and lips tighter, who came to the cabin one morning with a folded shawl in her arms and judgment in her eyes. She handed Juniper the shawl, a gift for Nathan, and said quietly, "A child deserves a real name and a real father." Juniper stood frozen in the doorway, words stuck in her throat like thorns. She nodded once, thanked the woman, and shut the door with trembling fingers. She stood there for a long time, pressing her forehead against the wood. Outside, Callum was leading the horse back from pasture, Nathan bouncing on his hip. He didn't ask what was wrong. He never did. But when Juniper opened the window, she saw him lift the boy and gently place him on the saddle, steadying him with both hands. "That's it," he said, soft and low. "Sit tall now. You've got strong legs." Nathan giggled, gripping the horn with both chubby hands. Callum stepped back, just far enough to give the boy a taste of freedom, but close enough to catch him if he slipped. Juniper felt something warm break behind her ribs. That evening, while she stirred stew on the stove, she noticed the new sign by the front steps. Nathan's home, carved by hand, each letter deep and uneven. She turned back to the kitchen and found another addition, a tiny chair at the table, just Nathan's size. The wood was smooth, the joints tight. She reached out and brushed a fingertip across the back rest. There, too, was the boy's name burned into the grain. She looked around the cabin, the patched curtain by the sink. Callum had fixed that. The back door no longer sagged on its hinge, the boots by the entry, his still tracked bits of dried mud inside, but she no longer minded. The firewood stacked perfectly. The quiet whistle he gave the chickens each morning. Everything had changed, and none of it had been hers alone for a long time now. She whispered aloud, not even sure to whom she was speaking. If this is pretending, I don't want it to end. Later that week, the air turned golden with late summer light. Nathan was in the yard learning to walk without holding on to anything. His legs were wobbly, but determined, like he had something urgent to reach. Callum was trimming fence posts nearby, but his eyes were on the boy. Juniper was just coming out with laundry when it happened. Nathan took 3 proud steps forward and fell. The moment he hit the ground, a sharp cry tore from his lungs. Juniper dropped the basket. Nathan, but Callum had already moved. He crouched down low, arms open, voice calm. "Come here, little man, you're all right." "Come on." Nathan scrambled up, still hiccuping with sobs, and ran. No, tumbled straight into his arms. Callum lifted him, pressing the small body against his chest, rubbing slow circles on the boy's back. Juniper stood frozen at the porch, heart clenched. Callum looked up at her over Nathan's shoulder. His voice, when it came, was hoarse but steady. "I don't want to pretend any more." Juniper felt her knees go weak. There were no fireworks, no music, just the creak of the windmill, the rustle of leaves, and her son falling asleep in the arms of a man who had never asked for this, but had stayed anyway. And for the first time since her husband died, Juniper didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was living. The storm came without warning. By nightfall, thunder cracked like rifles over the hills, and lightning split the sky. Wind howled through the trees, and rain slammed the cabin roof in relentless waves. Inside, the hearth burned low. Juniper rocked Nathan in her arms, but he was inconsolable, crying, twisting, tiny fists pounding her collarbone. "SHH, I'm here," she whispered, but it wasn't enough. The front door burst open. Callum stood soaked in the frame, hair plastered, shirt drenched. He had just returned from securing the animals. He saw the panic, the exhaustion, and walked straight to them. "Let me," he said. Juniper hesitated, then handed Nathan over carefully. The change was near instant. Callum tucked the boy into his arm and began to pace, humming low in his chest. Nathan's cries slowed, softening to hiccups, then faded altogether. Boy clung to his shirt, face buried. Juniper sat back on her heels, stunned. The tune Callum hummed was old, wordless, a lullaby from a lifetime ago. He'd once meant it for another child, one who never took a breath. Now it filled the cabin again. Nathan slept. Callum didn't stop walking. Juniper stood by the window, shawl wrapped tight, watching both storm and stillness. "You could have walked away so many times," she said. Callum looked down at Nathan. "But my feet keep finding their way back here." They said nothing else. When the storm passed, Callum laid Nathan in the crib and stood there for a long while, listening to the silence. The next morning, rain still dripped from the eaves. The pastor arrived at first light, coat damp, expression unreadable. He found Callum outside splitting wet logs. "Callum," he said gently, "you stood as a father before God. That means something." Callum paused, resting his hands on the axe handle. "I know," he said. "It means everything." The pastor nodded and left without another word. Callum remained, watching the mist lift from the trees. Then he went home. Inside, Juniper was packing a satchel, cloths, ointment, Nathan's little hat. She looked up startled. "He's running a fever," she said. "I was going to take him into town." Callum stepped forward and placed a hand over the bag. "You don't have to go alone anymore." She froze. He touched her arm, firm, gentle. "Let me be there. Let me stay for real." Juniper stared at him, words caught in her throat. She looked at Nathan, now dozing peacefully, then back at Callum, the man who had become part of their quiet days and storm-filled nights. Her voice, when it came, was soft and sure. "Then stay," she said, "not just for us, but for you, too." Callum nodded, and for the first time, it wasn't just a promise in church. It was a vow made in the stillness after the storm. 3 weeks passed. The morning sun painted the Red Creek Chapel in soft gold. It was a small gathering, no pews packed, no crowds whispering, just the ones who mattered, the preacher, a witness or two, and the little family standing beneath the wooden cross. Juniper wore a simple cream-colored dress, one she had sewn herself. Her hair was braided back with care. There were no flowers, no veil, just clarity in her eyes and calm in her breath. Callum stood beside her, Nathan in his arms, the boy dressed in a shirt too small and a vest too large, grinning at the sound of the chapel bell. Every time it rang, Nathan giggled and pointed to the rafters, and every time Callum smiled and bounced him gently, whispering, "Yes, I hear it too." The preacher stepped forward, hands folded. "Callum Vance," he said, "do you take this child as your own in front of God and man?" Callum looked down at Nathan, then up, his voice steady. "I already did." He pulled Nathan closer, resting his cheek briefly against the boy's hair. The preacher nodded and turned to Juniper. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small ring wrapped in cloth. It was silver, worn smooth by time. Callum recognized it instantly. "My wife's," he said, almost a breath. Juniper nodded. "I had it remade, not to forget the past, but so it could walk into the future with us." Her hands trembled slightly as she slipped the ring onto his finger. He didn't flinch, just held her gaze steady and soft. No vows were read aloud, no rehearsed speeches, just the look between them, one of truth, of choosing each other, not with grandeur, but with quiet resolve. Outside the breeze stirred the trees, and somewhere a robin sang. They left the church with Nathan between them. The boy perched on Callum's hip, his arms wrapped around both their necks. The wagon creaked down the dusty road, wheels humming over gravel, the horse steady and slow. Nathan sat between them now, legs dangling, hands sticky with crumbs Juniper had tucked in her basket. He looked up at Callum, eyes squinting against the sun. "Papa," he said, clear as the morning sky. Juniper froze. Callum turned, eyes wide. "Did you?" Juniper began. Callum reached for the boy's hand, wrapping his callous fingers around the tiny ones. "I'll never let you go, son," he said, voice thick with wonder. Juniper leaned against his shoulder, her head settling in that quiet space just beneath his chin. "You came for a child," she whispered, "but you saved a woman's heart, too." Callum kissed the top of her head, then whispered back, "I thought I lost my family once. Turns out they were waiting for me here." They rode on, past the chapel, past the fields, past the bend in the trail where wild flowers spilled like confetti. The sun warmed their backs, and the trees whispered with every gust. No longer pretending, no longer just surviving. 3 souls, 1 road, and a love real enough to begin again. If that story warmed your heart like a fire on a cold prairie night, don't forget to hit that hype button and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. From quiet chapels to open trails, we bring you tales of grit, grace, and the kind of love that doesn't just knock. It builds the whole damn door. More stories like "Can You Pretend to Be My Son's Father?" are coming your way every week. So, hit your wagon, stay a while, and remember out here, love rides slow, but when it arrives, it stays for good.